Hello, everybody. Crystal here at the Fibromyalgia Pain Chronicles and Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia, bringing you another informational video today. And joining me is Frank Rivera, who is an awesome advocate and a longtime friend. And he advocates on behalf of individuals living with sarcoidosis. He is the founder of Stronger Than Sarcoidosis and Sarcoidosis of Long Island. I asked Frank to join me today because within my communities, there are individuals, friends, followers, and supporters that have been diagnosed with sarcoidosis, along with I know some veterans who are diagnosed with this illness, and it could be a presumptive service connected condition that they can get compensated for through the VA. So I'm going to open this up to Frank. Frank, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate your time. I know you're very busy. If you could just give a little bit of an intro of your journey with sarcoidosis and maybe some examples of how this affects your life. So
Okay,
that,
sure.
yeah.
No problem. First of all, thank you for having me. Greatly appreciate it. Yeah, so I go back to 2004 where I was living in Florida at the time, and I used to run a lot, between 5 to 10 miles a day. And one day I just went out and I got about a quarter of a mile and I thought I was dying. I could not take another breath. That's how bad it was. It just hit me like that, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't. I felt my heart was pounding. So I called my then girlfriend at the time to pick me up. We went to the hospital. Go there. They find out that I have masses on. Went through the X-ray, found out I had masses on my lungs. They did a biopsy and told me I had lung cancer. Um, well, I was I was always in good shape because I was a runner, so I didn't think twice about it or anything. I should have asked for a second opinion, but I didn't, and I went through 4 years of chemo and radiation for what I thought was lung cancer. So yeah, so fast forward to 2009, I moved back. I'm born and raised from New York, and I moved back to New York, and I also have IBS, and I was having trouble, and I went to the hospital, and this was in 2011, and I was told I was in remission when I left Florida, so I thought everything was okay. So I go to the hospital here because of my stomach. They did an X-ray and they put the bottom lobes of my lungs and found out I still had masses in my lungs. So I'm thinking I have lung cancer. Came back again. They did another biopsy and they were like, "You don't have cancer, you have sarcoidosis." Now, it's kind of crazy because like my wife, her brother has sarcoidosis, but he had it diagnosed early enough and quick enough that he was in remission. So we're thinking, all right, we're going to take steroids or prednisone, and then I'll go into remission. I'll feel better. No, unfortunately, because of the 7 year gap that I didn't get diagnosed, plus with the radiation and the chemo breaking my body down, by the time I was diagnosed, I already had it in 75% of my body. It traveled all over my body. The quickest thing to describe sarcoidosis is you have overactive white blood cells, and they go to fight off a cold or anything, and instead of fighting it off, they clump up together and form granulomas or masses. And usually 90% of the people get it in their lungs first. And so, yeah, but they said between 90 to 95% of the people get it in their lungs first. They don't have a cause and they don't have a cure for it, but they do know what excites. And it's environmental issues, it's chemicals, it's heavy dusts, it's asbestos, all those, pesticides, all those kind of chemicals and stuff like that.
Exposure to toxic particulates of pretty much any kind is what triggers it. It's like it could lay dormant and stay there, but if the right circumstances all come together, then it's like boom. And
Yes.
one point you brought up, and I always, part of my advocacy in different areas is that early detection and diagnosis has improved outcomes of health. And so with your brother-in-law, it was detected early, so he responded to treatment very well, where in your case, it was so prolonged until you got the appropriate diagnosis, and then understanding how cancer treatment, it kills your immune system as it is. So you literally had no immunity, and then all of a sudden you're having this issue where you go to the hospital, and then they're like, "Oh, you had sarcoidosis," and you really didn't have cancer. So like all these things is kind of what led to where you are today with the severity of it.
Yes, I actually have it in every major organ of my body now. So it's not active in my liver and kidneys. It's there, but it's not active right now. Which every part of my heart, my brain, my bones. So yeah, it's pretty much everywhere.
And so I know you very well. So I know when I mean, not every day is easy, but I know those really bad days, like whether we have talked on the phone or we've messaged or we've done just a video connection and be like, hey, what's up? So I know what your really bad days look like. But like right now, an average person that watches this, they're going to say, oh, well, Frank looks okay considering his body is riddled with sarcoidosis. So, in a sense, there are times it's very much an invisible illness.
Yes, it really does attack from the inside out unless you have it on your skin. That's the only time it's noticeable per se. But every day I live with a 6 and 7 pain level from 1 to 10. That's my normal. So most people can't even live, at 6 or 7. They go into the hospital.
Right.
Where I had to learn to live with that. And for me, I'm not going to the hospital unless I'm at 9. Because so it's a big difference. I can't. In 2014, I had to go on disability. I couldn't work my job anymore. I was doing construction. I couldn't do it anymore. Um, so yeah, it's been a very big change in my whole outlook of life and everything I do. My whole daily life has changed now, and
And
I never know what I'm gonna feel like every day.
right, because every day is different and symptoms, they're always there, but they wax or wane. So like someone will be like, because I have fibromyalgia and well, I have a whole bunch of stuff like arthritis and degenerative disc disease and EDS, which is a connective tissue disorder, autoimmune and whatnot. And a lot of this, my trigger, the catalyst for me was it all started with a military vehicle accident that I was in. And it wasn't like a really tragic accident, but it was still an accident. And that is where everything slowly, because of that, unfolded and was triggering these things. And like with fibromyalgia, that accident was August of 2000. And I wasn't officially diagnosed until 2014. So, and I was diagnosed with severe treatment resistant fibromyalgia because what medications I'm not allergic to or didn't have a severe uh, potentially they can be life threatening rare side effect, the ones that I didn't have any reactions to, whatnot, what have you, were not really effective. So I was diagnosed with severe treatment resistant fibromyalgia. And again, I did work in the health space and mental health and the intellectual uh, disability fields. And so having that exposure from a professional perspective is I know with certain things that early detection and diagnosis is a major contributor of what the outcome of your quality of life is going to be. So that's why I'm really a huge proponent of if something's wrong, get it checked out, because if you don't, it could be something that will progress and then it'll be harder to manage the more it progresses. So that I feel, is kind of what happened for me. And it people don't realize, I say, like a person with a chronic illness, right? So you have sarcoidosis, I have fibromyalgia and all these other things, but we'll stick with these two because once you have a diagnosis of a medical condition, it's kind of like a dominoes effect because it's interfering with your autonomic it's causing autonomic like dysfunction, and it interferes with your internal bodily systems, and so like your immune system isn't as effective fighting back. So then you develop all these other conditions. But the main
Mhm.
ones, so for you, sarcoidosis, and myself, fibromyalgia, a lot of people don't understand the multiple levels of impact it has. And I kind of equate it to a spider web where the very inner circle is you, or it's me. And then everything that myself and my illness affects can be seen by the way it's spread out in the spider web. So like everything is linked together. So it's not like it just impacts your ability to work, it also can impact your self-efficacy, or one of the things you identify as, I'm a construction worker and I do all these things and I'm really strong and I can handle the heat and I can deal with this. And then, like me, social services. And I've always been an advocate in one way or another. So then there's that. And then it impacts your social circles because you can't really hang out with your friends like you used to, or your family. It impacts your income, and then there's financial hardship at times, or um because of finances, you're not able to always pay for certain medications, or right now with inflation, groceries, a basic human need, is out of reach for so many more people well before the pandemic now than it was before. And so all these levels, and then on top of that, it impacts your body, which impedes your ability to engage in activities of daily living every day or several days, or you can only do a couple things. So with sarcoidosis, just if you could get a quick snapshot of some of the typical symptoms, and then how your symptoms kind of impact your daily life from day to day.
Well, the biggest thing, and I talk about it all the time, is the fatigue, the fatigue factor. It's, uh, I mean, I was a runner, so I know what fatigue was. I run long distance, so but this just blows it away. It's like I don't. It's the different type of fatigue that we call it, and it's something that doesn't go away. It's just a matter of where you're at in your fatigue level. You're always going to have that fatigue. It's just a matter of where you are at in that fatigue level. Um, the other part is sarcoidosis is a very painful disease. Um, if you have it in your lungs, I mean, people get lung transplants because of it. That because I mean, the oxygen levels. I've seen people oxygen levels drop into 60s and 30%. That's how bad it gets. It blocks the breathing tubes in your lungs, um, in your heart. I mean, many people when they get it in the heart, unfortunately, they don't know they have it. A lot of people who get it in their heart find out after they die. They end up getting heart attacks, and that's how. I mean, there's two famous people that died of heart attacks. One was Michael Clark Duncan from the Green Mile. Um, yeah, he had a heart attack due to sarcoidosis in his heart. And then there was a football player, Reggie White. He was a really big football player, Hall of Famer. Same thing. He didn't find out. He didn't find out until after. They didn't find out he had sarcoidosis until afterwards. Where Michael Clark Duncan knew, but it still affected his heart too much. But yeah, so there are, but the one big thing about sarcoidosis is the quality of life. A lot of people don't die per se of sarcoidosis. They die of side effects from sarcoidosis because it is autoimmune and it affects the other parts of your autoimmune system. Um, People die from pneumonia because they can't fight it off or whatever. So it's a daily life problem, and that's a quality of life is really important, and it's really hard to live with. Like I said earlier, that I don't know how I'm going to feel until I wake up that day. So making appointments, trying to do things with my family, like you were talking about, it's just impossible. I always tell them, I'll say yes now, but it doesn't mean yes that day of. So it's very hard to deal with that way, and it's hard. I mean, it's hard to keep friends. I lost a lot of friends because I'm not going out and hanging out or whatever. And then even the family, like you said, you can look at me and I look fine. I mean, nobody would know that I had a disease. I mean, I do walk with a cane, but that's because of the my, what does they call it, macular degeneration or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just my bones are getting, and I'm a little unsteady. But otherwise, I mean, people would never know that I have any kind of rare disease. And I mean, when everybody asks, I'm sure the whole thing. When people ask how you're feeling, you're always like, I'm okay, or I'm fine, because you don't want to have to spend all that time explaining what is really going on, because they don't really want to hear all that anyway.
I always say if I'm out and about and I'm doing stuff, I'm like, well, today's a good day for me, so that's why I'm here. And there's a couple of things you brought up that I kind of want to springboard off of. Is that what people don't realize is like when we have something we need to do that's important. Like let's say you got to go to it's graduation. As we're recording this, this is high school and college graduation party season, and then weddings and just major events. Or I know for myself, they'll be like, oh, well, you're at this veteran resource event, or you presented on this topic at this, meeting or this conference. And I'm like, what you don't know is what I had to do and able to do that. So if it's something major, I'll be like, yeah, I'm resting the whole day before, sometimes more than 2 days. And then I have to carve out time after the fact of downtime so that my body can recuperate. So it's like I'm resting to gather up as much wellness and energy pennies I have to expend it all for this one thing. And then I go in recovery mode. And that's when, at least with my advocacy work, a lot of people are like, you're everywhere, you're this, you are doing these initiatives on your own and you're helping this person with this initiative. I said, well, that's how I show up to those things. So there are times where basically many times my social life is those events because they're important enough, or those advocacy initiatives are important enough that I need to curate my energy and wellness pennies for those specific things, and just kind of put some things socially on the side. And I'll get back to it. But that's the other thing, is people don't realize what it takes for us to show up. And like there's all this preparedness to be at our best foot forward so that we don't look like we're sick, right? And then the recovery time. And then the other thing, like we were talking about this before we started recording, was the fatigue factor. Like so many people, if you say, well, I'm like just tired, I'm really fatigued, and like I just feel like I'm walking through quicksand, or I have cement blocks on my feet, and people will be like, I'm tired too. And I'm kind of like, well, fatigue and tiredness are two different things. And I'm not discounting how tired people are, because I was in the military. I know what it's like to be up for hours on end, days on end. And this is way worse than that, or what those who have been on patrol or reconnaissance, or they call it patrol sleep. It's so much more pervasive than that. And what I recently created a post where I said, when you're saying I'm tired too to someone who's suffering from chronic fatigue, and when they tell you it's chronic and it's fatigue, it's totally different than being tired. But while you might mean well and you're trying to be relatable, what happens is it kind of invalidates us, because we're like, I know you're tired and it sucks. I mean, I see single moms out there and I'm like, ooh, I'll be like, I don't know how they do it. I know I couldn't do it. I know I couldn't do it healthy or unhealthy, because it takes so much energy. But if you sleep or if you rest a day or two, you're rejuvenated and you can keep going like the Energizer Bunny. When you're suffering from chronic fatigue versus being tired, so being tired means you run out of energy, but being fatigued, chronically fatigued, means you can't make the energy. And that's why you are chronically fatigued. And it's not just this feeling of being tired, it's your muscles are tired and they're weak and you're moving slower and your concentration is way off, and your speech, like your ability to articulate, is just, I mean, listen, there's a lot of times talk to text really messes with me, and sends some messages and I'm like, whoa, thank goodness my friends have a good sense of humor, because I've said some things, well, no, talk to text did. But then there's times where it's me typing, I'm so fatigued it's like I see the screen, I see the words, it seems okay, and then I send it. And then I realize, like, wow, sorry for all those typos, and I really didn't mean, you know, the jacked up tree in the trunk of your car. That's just an
Yeah.
example, but this is what I meant. So there's so many things that fatigue impacts, not just our body, but our mental status, our alert status, our cognitive status. And then,
Mhm.
to say like, oh, I'm tired too. And I'm like, I know, and I'm empathizing with that. But in the same token, it's not the same level. So it's like being tired, you run out of energy. Having chronic fatigue, you don't make enough energy. And it's kind of like a comparison that people are doing. And I'm like, hey, that's like comparing like filet mignon to canner beef. There's eight
Yeah.
grades. There's 8 grades of USDA beef. There's 8 levels. So you
Mhm.
got your filet mignon that, it's like by the best, like whatever, cattle farmer and the best in the world. And then you got canner beef, which is kind of all the stuff left over. And that's like very low grade. So it's like, okay, in the spectrum of tiredness, like you're tired, but you're still up here. Maybe you're not a filet mignon today. Maybe you're, a sirloin or even a chuck roast, but I will always be canner beef. That's where I'm at. Some
Yeah.
days are better than others. So that's where people, I think, have a hard time kind of coming to terms with. We show up to things and
Yeah.
then they're like, I see you are engaged in DC, you are, a strong voice in the sarcoidosis community. You're part of a variety of patient-centric and health-centric platforms and informational posts and videos and articles and whatnot, and you're speaking with your governmental officials. But what people don't realize is that's all you're doing. Like, you're not vacuuming, you're not going grocery shopping, you're not going out to dinner with your friends, and not even with your wife sometimes, because all of your energy pennies have been spent on that one event. And then you have to recuperate, and then you hope that recuperation and recovery is quicker, and you hope that you
Mhm.
are at a good level when you kind of bounce back. And so one event or one day or 2 days dictates your entire week, sometimes
Mhm.
2 weeks,
Yeah.
sometimes, like when I've had surgery, as you know, I had a heart attack in January, which was indirectly, and it's going to kind of tap on when you said people with sarcoidosis don't typically die from sarcoidosis, but all these things that it interferes with and damages within the body. So the heart attack or pneumonia. So with fibromyalgia, we develop Raynaud's syndrome. A lot of us do. It's a very common coexisting condition. And that causes your blood vessels and arteries in your body to spasm and twitch and constrict. And when it constricts, it reduces blood flow, including the arteries in your heart. So, long story short, they did all the tests. It's like, oh, well, her arteries are clean. There's no plaque buildup. There's no, heart disease. There's not this, all the typical things that causes a heart attack. And of course, I'm not within the age group and I'm at a healthy weight. And the cardiologist, who just so happened to be familiar with fibromyalgia because they had a family member with it and understood Raynaud's is very common with fibromyalgia. And then after doing all the detective work and the tests and everything, they did conclude that Raynaud's is what triggered the heart attack. And it's more likely than not, if I didn't have fibromyalgia, I wouldn't have Raynaud's and I wouldn't have had the heart attack. But there's
Mhm.
other people I know with fibromyalgia that have had a heart attack due to similar secondary or coexisting medical conditions that come with fibromyalgia. And so with sarcoidosis, we're seeing that as well, and I see this with lupus as well, where it's not necessarily lupus, but it's attacking your organs or it's interfering with your body's ability to function appropriately. And then it causes all these problems. And that's when we see um, people really over time kind of sliding down the hill of health, and then they have a heart attack or it attacks their kidneys and your kidneys aren't functioning anymore. And
Yeah.
so that's what people don't realize is like you can have all this internal junk going on and it's really bad, but on here we look okay.
Yeah.
And
And
then
we just learn how to live with
right,
it.
and then it's hard for people to reconcile how someone can look okay uh people closest to us know when we're in our flare days. They know when it's bad, but they have a hard time reconciling. But you look like this, so how can this be happening? And I'm kind of like, let's look at a car. If you don't put oil in your engine, what's going to happen? Or if you don't change it out and it gets dirty, what's going to happen? It might still run, but it's going to start causing problems in other parts of the car that you might not even be able to see when you pop the hood. And then you got to figure it out. And then hopefully you didn't like damage something so bad that you have a costly repair. That is kind of like the only analogy I can make for people to try to understand where we're coming from. So when you are dealing with the symptoms on top of everything else, it does cause stress to your emotional well-being, and you want to show up, but then you feel bad, or other people who don't understand make you feel bad, like, oh, you were fine when you went to Washington D.C., or you were fine when you met with your state representative last week, why can't you come to this? And it's like, I'm still recovering from that. So and so chronic pain, pervasive chronic fatigue, and like muscle weakness, and some of these other things, we see these overlapping symptoms. That's why I relate to you so much, because we're like speaking the same language, but like a different dialect, because we have medical conditions, but we can communicate how these symptoms of our conditions impact our lives. But a lot of people, like you said, you didn't know you had sarcoidosis. And a lot of people I know who came about the diagnosis, like they were looking for something else, and that's what they found by like default, and that's how they got diagnosed. So if someone suspects they have sarcoidosis, or they're already diagnosed, what type of, I don't want to say specialist, because it's usually a multi approach, but what are the typical medical specialties a person should access and go to for the oversight and treatment and medical support for sarcoidosis?
There are sarcoidosis specialists, and there are sarcoidosis center of excellences in the United States and in the world, actually. But 90% of the people get it in their lungs first, so a pulmonologist would probably be one of the first things. And a lot of times, your pulmonologist will be your contact person, because, like I said, it usually starts there. So that's usually where most of the people get it, and they actually get it their worst in their lungs. So, but I mean, they're all, I mean, I see different. I see cardiologists, I see, rheumatologists, I see neurologists. But like I said, I do have a sarcoidosis specialist in New York City that, kind of like he watches over my, he's the one who picked my doctors here where I live, which was great because I can't drive anymore. Because of my illnesses. And so instead of having to go into New York City, which is about 2 hours for me, especially now, I would have to take the train and subway and blah, blah, blah. And he picked doctors that report to him that are close to me within 20 minutes each way. And we're on one big straight, they all contact each other. They're all actually, except for one, is in the same hospital. So it really makes it easy because now the portal is all the same as well. So all the all the scans, they can all get like that. As soon as it goes in, it goes for everybody. Everybody can grab it. So that makes it a lot easier for everybody.
So you have a very collaborative, cohesive team working together in your care.
But it took me
but thinking of like veterans, or thinking about people who are like in healthcare deserts, and like you might not have access, it might be 2 hours away, and there might not be necessarily something local, but a starting point that I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of times sarcoidosis starts in the lungs. So it's typical, not always, it's typical to start with a pulmonologist.
Yes.
And then because of all the intersectionality that goes on with your illness in your body, it ends up leading that you might need to have a cardiologist and a rheumatologist, and even a pain specialist is needed. But the biggest thing is being your own advocate, especially, I'm assuming, based on, I'm making a presumption here, so hopefully I'm not being ableist, but I'm assuming that your experience of the delayed diagnosis is not necessarily uncommon for people with sarcoidosis. And the reason why I assume this is because, like I said, I know people who kind of came about their diagnosis as sarcoidosis by default because they were actually thinking it was something else, or they were looking for something else. And they're like, oh, well, okay, yeah, you do have this problem of, I don't know, XYZ. Yeah, you have IBS. But while we were scanning and doing a CAT scan, we found this on your lungs and we need to do a biopsy to determine what it is. So I hear a lot of those stories in your community. And so I guess I'm being presumptuous. So correct me if I'm wrong, but do you hear that a lot where, hey, I wasn't diagnosed right away because they didn't know, or they were looking for something else, and that's when they found it?
Yeah, the average time it takes to diagnose sarcoidosis is running around 6 to 7 years.
Oh my.
Yeah, it's a disease of exclusion. So they exclude all these other diseases out before they actually. And we are as an organization with other organizations and doctors and stuff are trying to teach doctors to stop looking at it as an exclusion and look at it as one of the main things now, because it is growing so quickly, unfortunately, due to with the burn pits and like 9/11. There's a lot of people from 9/11, first responders and survivors, that have sarcoidosis. Our numbers have jumped exponentially since 2001. I mean, just in one hospital that's a sarcoidosis clinic, Mount Sinai Hospital, went from having 1,500 patients in 2001. Now they have over 20,000 patients, just
Wow.
sarcoidosis patients.
Wow.
And so, I mean, and that's in that time frame. 2001, they had 1,500. So from there on, and they're getting they average about 30 to 40 new patients a month. That's how much it is. It's growing. So we got to stop making it an exclusion and start making it as a priority. Because, like I said earlier, like with my brother-in-law, 75% of the people, if it gets caught within the first year, go in remission. That's a big amount, 75%.
If it's caught
So
early, if it's caught early.
People could live with it and it could go in remission. And like he's had one flare up in it's almost 30 years now that he's had it. And he's had one flare up, and same thing. He went on steroids and he was fine. He went on prednisone, and a week later he was fine again. So it is controllable if it gets caught early enough. So early detection is so important.
It reminds me of so many other medical conditions like cancer. If you can catch it early, like the prognosis and outcome is really good. And as patients, we have to be okay with being uncomfortable and advocating for ourselves and going for that second opinion, going for that third opinion, going and really saying, no, you have to put that referral in. If you don't, you're violating my patient rights to appropriate and timely access to healthcare. Because I know personally, so like on the VA side of things, I can't tell you, like my hip is a great example, and I ended up having to get like a hip reconstruction like surgery. It was pretty intense, but I had 9 different licensed medical providers look at all the images and assess me and have appointments. And the funny thing is, it was the 10th provider that zeroed in on, it's not any of these other diagnoses, and it was a physician assistant. And she was like, I mean, I was diagnosed with my right leg was shorter than my left leg, bursitis, just all these different things. And I'm like, I can't lay on my side. I feel like my leg is giving out at the hip, like literally like dislocating a little bit and all this stuff. And I know from personal experience, just in that instance, and it took me 28 months to get what I needed, which was surgery. And there's been other instances like with my neck, and it turned out like my discs were so bad in my neck, they were pressing on my spinal cord and I was leaking spinal fluid. And I went through 19 months of that and like denying like putting in a referral. And I was like, well, thank goodness I have private health insurance, because now I'm going to private health care. But on the same token, I've had images read both at the VA and the private healthcare sector where they weren't correct. The outcome, and it's much more common than we realize. And so that's why I'm a huge proponent of don't just get a second opinion, get a third opinion, go to a different healthcare facility if you have insurance that covers it. So like I'm in Cleveland, Ohio. So we have like Cleveland Clinic, University, Sumacare, Metro Health. I mean, it goes on and on. So I could go to Metro Health and I'm kind of like, okay, now I'm going to get a second opinion at Cleveland Clinic. And okay, now I'm going to get a third opinion at university hospitals. And I understand that I am a rarity. Like you and I, we do have access to a lot of medical care systems, and someone in the middle of Utah does not, or Wyoming, or, you know, back roads of Texas. I mean, I am very, I realize that. But if you have the opportunity, or if you could do telehealth for a second opinion, like you can request your records be sent to a provider, do those things. I want people to advocate on their own behalf as the way they would for a loved one, whether it's a spouse, a parent, a child. Advocate for those you love, for yourself as well, because you're just as important. And so again, it's like that's, I think that this patient education, the awareness that you're doing, what we're all doing, and educating doctors is going to hopefully shrink that time frame of an average diagnosis for sarcoidosis or fibromyalgia. It's a long diagnosis. I see this so often with invisible illnesses that it takes them 3, 5, 10 years to get the right diagnosis. And so that's why getting that second or third opinion, I think, is really detrimental to your overall health. And that you can, even if they all come to the same conclusion, I feel like as a patient or even a caregiver, you're in a position where you feel more well informed for making decisions about your health. So to kind of tie this up, and one of the reasons, as Frank, you brought up, is that we're seeing an uptick of veterans being diagnosed with sarcoidosis because of exposure to toxic particulates like sarin gas during the Gulf War, or burn pits, Iraq and Afghanistan. And even I've know a couple of Vietnam veterans exposed to Agent Orange who've been diagnosed with sarcoidosis. And one of the things that I also wanted to touch upon, and the reason why I asked you to join me, is because you are an expert on sarcoidosis. And while I can speak about it, I won't, be able to really elaborate the way you can. However, I'm seeing this uptick of veterans being diagnosed with sarcoidosis, especially those exposed to burn pits, which also, in theory, shows that, yeah, toxic exposure seems to be the main variable of triggering it, right? Like particulates in the air. So what a lot of veterans don't know that I've come across is right now under the Pact Act, the Veterans Affairs Pact Act, sarcoidosis is considered a presumptive condition if you were exposed to burn pits or were in regions where you're exposed to toxic particulates. However, time is running out. And come, I believe it's like August 9th of 2023, so 6 weeks from now, if you do not file what they call a claim of intent to apply for benefits for sarcoidosis, after that expiration date, it's going to become very, very difficult to apply for sarcoidosis as a presumptive condition related to your time in service. And so, Frank knows what it is like to go from being able to provide for yourself financially to not being able to work. But as a veteran, if you don't at least file that intent to file, if you have sarcoidosis, you're going to lose that ability potentially. Not to say you wouldn't get it after the expiration date of August of 2023, is that you will have a harder fight trying to get service connection for sarcoidosis. So if you're in the process of, seeing if you are, you do have sarcoidosis, you really got to advocate to get that diagnosis if that's what it is. And if you have it and, you haven't filed a VA claim under the Pact Act for sarcoidosis, you need to do that immediately, at least the intent to file. And you'll still have 12 months if you do an intent to file, which you can do it online through e-benefits, or you can go to an accredited veteran service organization in your area to put in that form of, which basically says, I intend to file for basically compensation for service connection for sarcoidosis, and have it on their books, and that gives you 12 months to submit all of your documentation. And I know a couple of veterans right now who are going through the process of diagnosis. I said, put in your intent to file, because if you don't get that diagnosis before, August, I gotta pull it up. It drives me crazy when I can't remember the exact dates of things. But if you don't get that diagnosis prior to that, then you're gonna have a hard time getting compensated for that service-connected condition. August 9th, 2023. So basically, here's the thing, let me correct myself. There's no deadline to apply for Pact Act benefits, but if you file your Pact Act claim, in this case, sarcoidosis, you want to file by August 9th of 2023 so that you may receive backdated benefits to August 10th of 2022. So that's what the deadline is. If you apply for VA compensation for sarcoidosis as a presumptive condition and you do so after August 9th, you won't get back pay all the way to August 10th. So if you got it, put your intent to file in. And then before we wrap up, Frank, do you have like any other tips or bits of information that you want to share as a patient advocate or as someone living with sarcoidosis or chronic pain?
I always tell everybody who has lived with chronic pain is to listen to your body. Because I mean, doctors know what like the book says, but if they don't listen, if you don't, or they don't listen to you, that it's hard to. And if you don't listen to you, it's hard for you or them to treat you, because not everybody is a book. Sarcoidosis, they call it a snowflake disease because no two patients are the same. They don't have the same same problems, like where they have it in their bodies, or even in like 90% have it in their lungs. They have different problems with it in their lungs. So it's that's why I always say you have to be your own best advocate, like you said. One of the things, like if you feel like you're having asthma, if you're getting dry coughs, I would also, that's one of the things that I had right away. And I really thought I had asthma because my dad had asthma. But that's one of the first things my doctor said to me is, are you having dry coughs? And how frequently? So that was one of the things that right off the bat you might want to look at and just say, hey, what about? And there are, if you look up sarcoidosis sites, my own, sarcoidosis of Long Island or Stronger Than Sarcoidosis, that breaks down sarcoidosis. You can do that, or there's also Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, which really breaks each part of your body down. If you see that something looks right, like, hey, wait a minute, I'm going through this right now, then you might be able to help your own diagnosis quicker.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I hear that a lot across the variety of medical spaces, that the patient actually kind of zoned in on what potentially they might be contending with as far as a medical condition before being diagnosed. So again, if you or a loved one or you suspect you have sarcoidosis, make sure to check out Frank Rivera at Stronger Than Sarcoidosis or Sarcoidosis of Long Island. And until next time, make your self-care your number one priority. Love yourselves and love each other. And that's a wrap.